Welcome back to our panel discussion, Innovation and Tech Superiority Through Acquisition Reform, sponsored by Brocade, here on federalnewsradio.com at 1500 AM. Our guests today are Joanne Wojtek, the Program Manager for NASA Soup, Joe Paiva, the Chief Information Officer at the International Trade Administration, Steve Charles is the Co-Founder and Executive Vice President of Imix Group, and Tony Celesti is the Director at Brocade Federal. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And Tony, you have some research that you wanted to cite about done by the Government Business Council that seems to get at this whole issue of what is the best way to acquire. And so tell us about that.
Yeah, the Government Business Council recently did a survey of 300 senior managers and senior executives in government IT. And what was interesting, a couple of points, only 60% of them were somewhat or not confident at all in the current acquisition process to acquire IT solutions to meet the agency's mission needs. Also, 42% of them indicated that, they indicated that 42% of their acquisitions, IT acquisitions, were brand name specific. And they attributed that largely due to mission needs or mission requirements, but 35% were attributed to proprietary protocols and vendor lock-ins.
All right, so Joe, that sounds to me like you've got technology people or IT guys who are buying the shiny things you mentioned earlier, and maybe this is where CIOs can assert some authority as to making sure you're getting what you really need for that mission and also the best money, the best product for your dollar.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's up to CIOs to make sure, like I said earlier, that you actually have teammates in the boardroom and that you understand the business and you can get past the shiny whatever it is syndrome and actually state what you need without going down the role of specifications. You know, in the military, we used to mil-spec everything and finally figured out years ago, I mean, they just made it against the rules to use mil-specs. And we did that for a reason, right? Because we realized that we were no longer buying 98% of the world's transistors, right? We were using a tiny fraction. I think some of the overuse of standards in IT really has to go the way of mil-spec.
Steve, continuing on that theme of empowerment and CIOs asserting some authority, there's reform legislation that seems to be taking hold here in the United States that gives a lot more authority to CIOs. Is that a good thing, and will that help this whole idea of mission-supported requirements as opposed to product brand name buying?
Sure. Well, generally, I believe that some additional authority for the CIO is a good idea because the CIO needs to have a seat at the table at the C-level. The OMB, the CIO office, has been conducting these portfolio stat sessions with the different agencies, which, as I understand it, brings the whole C-level team together to look at the IT portfolio with the future in mind. And so I believe that the legislation is about moving the needle toward having the senior team take responsibility for IT as an enabler and making sure that the message gets driven down to the workforce, the direction that the agency wants to have in terms of its IT infrastructure and its apps and all of that. So it all does begin with that leadership, that business leadership, that cultural leadership. At the same time, we are working every day with program level folks who are not looking far ahead. And in the absence, and we see such an absence of that kind of leadership in many agencies. And that's the real thing that we should start to tackle. And I don't know that the legislation gets at that. I really think that does become a leadership issue. It is very different from one agency to the next. It's just remarkable.
And Tony, I want to get back to the standards issue that Joe mentioned, because when you talk about mil-spec, you're talking about something that was unique to the military. But when you get away from, say, a mil-spec transistor or any other product, don't you want industry standards in terms of the electrical connections, pin by pin, or standards for networking, whatever that case might be, so that you get proprietariness out of the system and that gives you that more maneuverability around the industry.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. I mean, we want to see government agencies' requirements be less prescriptive, leverage open industry standards, and relate their requirements back to the mission need. And if we do that, it will truly allow the U.S. IT industry to innovate and continue to differentiate its solutions. And as a result, the government will see a better value and a better return on its IT investments.
And Joanne, do we see that trend happening in what is flowing through vehicles like NASA Soup? Less dependence on proprietary standards and more on innovation product by product around industry standards that might be, for lack of a better word, plug compatible?
Well, I think no, in some ways, because I think
that's disappointing.
well, not necessarily. I think we always have to be. I'll go back to the statement. You have to be careful about innovation and reform, and the fact that there is a lot of infrastructure and people have to keep things running. Now, that being said, there is a growing sense of the CIO level of things and trying to get a better idea. So I'm not sure that the procurements are quite there yet, but I think we're trying to find ways to work with the CIO's offices. And one of the things that happened as a illustrative of this, and also a little plug for the NASA Soup program, we've always been kind of there for the procurement shop and there for the technical people. And a few years ago, I realized in discussing with our CIO and others that we needed to also be there for the CIOs and help them understand what's being purchased and why it's being purchased. And whether or not they need more authority is a question for CIOs to decide, but they need information. And so we're actually working on trying to get them that information so they can then make the decisions. I think that has to happen first, and some of this other things about changing budgetary rules and understanding better how to use the FAR have to happen before you can. And then you have to have a reason. Why do you have to innovate? When do you have to innovate? And then you can use those programs that can get you there.
So two things, right? One, to just clarify my point about the standards. I think the challenge with standards is I totally believe in using open industry standards. The challenge I have is the over-prescriptiveness that was just mentioned. And it kind of, an example is GSM versus CDMA. In theory, GSM and CDMA cellular standards are both open industry standards. Yet clearly, by specifying one or the other, I drive my acquisition to one vendor or another. And so I think the challenge with open industry standards is not all open industry standards are all that open. In other words, there are competing standards bodies sponsored by different industry groups that have competing products. So I totally believe in truly open industry standards. I'm just not sure the government always has enough expertise to know when a standard is truly open and when it's just had a not-for-profit slap a label on it so it can call it open while they're collecting checks from one or more vendor groups. And then I do want to answer your question about CIO authorities in law. So there's a saying, respect is earned, not given. I don't need anyone in Congress to give me authority. The way I gain my authority is by delivering my customers the service they need to do their jobs, by being honest with them, by being transparent with them, by being candid with them when I mess up, and by involving them in my decision-making process and making sure I'm involved in theirs. I don't need Congress to do that for me. I can do that myself, and that's a CIO's responsibility.
Well stated. Steve?
And just to echo that, I mean, Clarence Cohen did give the CIO position plenty of authority, and those who exercise it and lead and in sync with their team, they are doing incredible things. But I would like to spend more time now talking about this technical standards thing. We have the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which was formed because we didn't have standards around fire hydrants. Firefighters' hoses weren't interoperable. And the same thing with electrical outlets. So standards help us develop platforms that we then can innovate on top of. That said, the standard itself is not innovative. The standard becomes the commoditized layer, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to keep some distinction between those two. There are plenty of folks doing innovative technology for which a standard hasn't even been considered yet, right?
And you wouldn't want to avoid it just because there is no standard
No, that would
associated with
stifle
it.
innovation at that level. Mm-hmm. But as we get down the stack to the more commonly utilized, the kinds of stuff that's part of the portfolio stat process, then we need to ask ourselves, what is the layer that needs to be commoditized today and in the next 2 years? And what are the standards? And starting to turn that layer into the electrical outlets and the fire hydrants of the future, upon which then usage creates innovation. But I want us to be very clear here. Standards follow technical innovation. They become the platform for application innovation.
It reminds me many years ago when Kodak couldn't sell 12-inch optical discs because the big vendors were all selling 10-inch discs. And so they went out and had IEEE create a standard for 12-inch discs. And, you know, where are they today and where is Kodak today? Neither one exists anymore. So it's not necessarily that those kinds of standards get you the innovation that sticks, but then there became standards for the other thing. Joanne?
So just to follow on with that, that reminds me of one of the issues that we in the government have to remember. We're no longer the driver of standards and IT that we once were. You know, when I first went to Goddard Space Flight Center, we were the biggest computer user in the world. When we asked for something, everybody jumped.
It's for John Glenn. We got to have it.
Right. Now, you know, we're just one of millions and billions of people that have cell phones and laptops and tablets, and that's what drives it. And so we have to be aware that we can only innovate so far and require so much of industry. We also have to be aware that they're going to be driven much by what the consumers are doing, because that's where the money is.
Sure. And the next round of tech innovation that I wanted to talk about is the idea of service, of providing what used to be a product, providing that functionality as a service. And the cloud gets into this, infrastructure as a service, and all other things as a service. And so how does that help us get to the future? It seems like that's the way things are going and that a government should embrace. Tony, thoughts?
Yeah, so I think when you look at the pressures today our agencies are under with either flat or declining budgets, they're challenged, right? Because as Joanne pointed out, they have a mission that they need to sustain. And that's largely why, 70% of every IT dollar goes towards supporting these legacy systems. This as-a-service model now provides an ability for an agency to maybe migrate over time to new technologies, and again, more innovative, that provide greater value to citizens, the warfighter, and veterans, but at a lower cost model. But to get there, you have to have standards, as Steve pointed out. You have to come up with the minimum set, not be over prescriptive in your requirements, and because you're going to need to allow for these things to interoperate and work with one another. So infrastructure as a service, product as a service, software as a service are all winning future acquisition models, and they're available today, I believe, on NASA Soup.
All right, yeah, that's a good question. Are the services now available? Are they having an effect on what used to be a totally product-oriented set of GWACs?
Right, and in fact, Ames Research Center will shortly be announcing a cloud requirement through SOUP that they have awarded. So, we are seeing more of that. The AWS type of services, the Microsoft cloud services, they're all available. I think I was recently on a cloud panel, and the one issue that's still really hanging out there is the acquisition and budgetary issues that go with that. But that's a whole other discussion of how to pay for those services. It does cause some issues.
Yeah, because it's by the month. It almost seems like leasing in a financial sense, if not in a product sense.
Right. It's not only by the month, but it's also by the month. And if you go over, we'll just charge you later. And you can't do it in the government. You have to, you have a budget you have to stay within. So there has to be some rule changes for either within industry or the government to handle that.
All right, Steve, thoughts on the whole service movement?
Sure. So I would look at this from a financial perspective. This is a question of who owns the asset. The end customers today, corporations and increasingly the government, are saying, let's get the asset off the balance sheet and buy the result of those assets. The question is, who's going to actually own the asset? This is turning our industry upside down. Vendors are used to selling their products to distributors, wholesalers, who in turn supply to retailers, resellers, who then in turn sell to the government. Today, we are looking at potentially the manufacturer. Brocade here has Brocade Network subscription service, right? Hard networking gear, switches, routers, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, all available, for a service, right? Well, in that case, Brocade is holding the asset. It's a completely different financial model. And it extends itself into who owns the asset and then gets into government unique financial environments, which is how do we pay for this when we don't really own it? And it's based on usage, but our contract isn't really contemplating that.
All right, Joe, we have about 15 seconds left for you to have the final thought.
It's music to my ears to hear that Soup is adding those types of software as a service, infrastructure as a service. To be clear, as long as I am the CIO, any federal agency I'm attached to will never buy another server, will never buy another router, will never buy another switch. And to the extent that they can make it so I can put money on things like Soup and get those things as services, I'm there.
All right. That's a good note to end on. I want to thank today's guests. Joanne Wojtek is the program manager for NASA Soup. Steve Charles, the co-founder and executive vice president of Immix Group. Joe Paiva, the chief information officer of the International Trade Administration. And Tony Celesti, the director of Brocade Federal. I'm Tom Temin, federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.
On behalf of Brocade, thank you for joining our discussion. We'll have the archive from this session available shortly, and a link will be sent to you to share with your colleagues. Those of you who requested a training certificate for this webinar should receive it in the next 2 weeks. For more insights about federal IT procurement, download the Federal Manager Survey results at federalnewsradio.com and search procurement. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.